Good morning to all of you, and thank you for coming. This is our first 2020 President's Panel on Politics and Policy. It was begun in 2016 after the election, and it was an attempt by President Perman at the time to have an opportunity to bring our community together, to talk, to understand our fundamental mission, which is to improve the human condition. And what this panel has served to do has been to have dialogue and have voices from different points of our society, political and otherwise, to talk to us about these major shifts in American politics. Shift in the leadership, which you all know, shift in the ability of the Congress to work as a team or not, and to learn how Maryland politics fits into this national scene. And we've had some very distinguished speakers here, which many of you will remember, and they have had differing voices. But I think the important and the main theme here is to make sure that we hear what is great about this country and what we need to do to make it even greater than it is now. Our guest today is Mr. Michael Steele. I want to thank you for coming to the University of Maryland, Baltimore. It's a great place, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. To most of you, he is not a stranger. He served as the Lieutenant Governor under Governor Bob Ehrlich in 2003 and on, and is notable that he is the first African American in this state to serve in that high role. And that's not his only achievement. That is certainly one achievement, because he also served as chairman of the Republican National Committee in 2009 after he left this position, and also the first African American to serve in that position. So we thank you for taking on those roles. Mr. Steele has become an expert on the national scene relative to political strategy and election reform. He served on a number of high-level committees, including the Federal Election Reform Commission and also the NAACP Blue Ribbon Commission on Election Reform. Also, he has served as the chair of GOPAC, and I had to learn about that. That's a premier organization in the Republican Party that's meant to educate and then elect a new generation of Republicans to elected office. So that must be an interesting job. Yes. His ability as a political commentator has certainly been highlighted in MSNBC, for those of you who have seen that. He has also appeared on Meet the Press, Face the Nation. I particularly was struck by HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and there must be many great stories about that one. And Comedy Central's The Daily Show. And I can't imagine for me how I would do on a show like that, so you must be really talented. In addition to these other roles, he also co-hosts the Steele and Unger show on the POTUS radio channel on Sirius, for those of you who listen to that, and also has his own podcast, the Michael Steele Podcast. His writings on law, business, and politics have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, thehill.com, politico.com, theroot.com, and he describes himself as a Lincoln Republican, which I suspect we'll hear a little bit more about. He was born at Andrews Air Force Base in Prince George's County, grew up in Washington, D.C., went to be a seminarian in the Order of St. Augustine in preparation for priesthood, but made a left turn or right turn, or whichever direction that was. Was that up or down? Okay, to choose a career in law, and subsequently went to the Georgetown University Law School in 1991. He has 2 sons and is married and has a wonderful personal life, which we were hearing about over breakfast. So please welcome Mr. Michael Steele to the podium.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Good morning. What's up? How's everybody doing? You good? Seriously, you all right? Because it's a little bit crazy out there. I just want to make sure everybody's doing well. I'm okay. I'm having fun. I don't know about the rest of you. I love politics. It's been, no I don't, it's been a pain in the behind. I'm really honored. Mr. President, Provost, got the Provost in the house. You know this is a big deal when the Provost shows up, right? I've learned that over the years, right? No, I really appreciate being back here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, you guys. I remember my time in office, coming on campus and working with administrators and doing that voodoo that we had to do to make things work, and it's really nice to be back in your house. Today, I thought, because we'll have a little bit of time together, that I wanted to sort of set the stage before, because the most fun is the Q&A part. Let's just cut to the quick. I mean, I can sit up here and say all kinds of crazy stuff, but at the end of the day, you want to get into the nitty-gritty of what the hell's going on and why is it happening and when does it end, who's up, who's down. We'll get into that, but I think it's important first to sort of start with the idea of expectations, because I think for me, as I've sort of spent time talking with people around the country, that seems to be the theme, that seems to be the narrative that keeps coming back. So I'll tell you two little vignettes of how expectations work. So when I was lieutenant governor, the beauty of the job is manifold. I mean, there's just so many wonderful aspects of being in the office and serving the people of this wonderful state, and its diversity and its intricacies. But little known is that the office of the lieutenant governor was the former office of one Thomas Jefferson. How many of you knew that? Right? How many of you remember that this wonderful state was the capital of the United States? That Maryland was actually the capital of the United States for almost 2 years. And during that time, Thomas Jefferson worked in our State House on the second floor in an office that is now the office of the Lieutenant Governor. So when I got elected, I was stoked to walk into this office. And the day I arrived in officially after the inauguration, the archivist of the Capitol meets me, and he's there and presents me with a book of letters that Thomas Jefferson wrote while he was in that office. So cool, right? I'm like, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. So in the room, to really round out the full experience of being in Thomas Jefferson's office, there was a chair, right, that was in the office at the time Thomas Jefferson worked there. And it was a chair, but it was one of those fancy chairs from back in the day, right? And it had a little rope on it and everything. So I went to remove the rope to sit in the chair. And the archivist was like, you can't do that. I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, you can't sit in the chair. I was like, why not? He said, well, because it's old, it's an antique, and you can't sit in the chair. I said, but it's in my office. He said, but you can't sit in the chair. I said, but I'm the lieutenant governor. He said, you still can't sit in the chair. That's why the rope is on the chair. I said, okay, all right. So I said, I got you. So I had to leave and go do stuff. The next day I come in, no chair. Took the chair out of my office. I said, okay. Expectations. I thought I had it worked out. He had to go, so when he goes, I'm going to sit in the chair. No. The second one was, so I was asked to do a Martin Luther King holiday celebration with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. I don't know if you've ever attended the symphony. If you haven't, you should. Phenomenally good. But this particular program was when they wanted to have me read to BSO orchestration the I Have a Dream speech. Okay, right. All right, so that speech. So the young lady calls me up and she's talking to me, and she's like, okay, so it's really easy. You read the speech, the orchestra will play behind you, right? Not so hard. I'm like, no, that's not how this is not going. Do you know, this is the I Have a Dream speech. This is not like, oh, Mary Had a Little Lamb, or, you know, some hip hop rendition of Faust. I mean, this is, you know, no. So she said, look, I tell you what, this is really easy. We've had people do this before. We have folks do it every year. It's not a big deal, all right? We'll send you a CD, and you'll get a sense of what we want. It's not that hard. I was like, okay, well, that'll make me feel better, because that way I can get a feel, you know, somebody else has done it. I can see how they did it, and I can see how the music plays it out. So the CD comes. I'm in my office. I put it in the player. James Earl Jones. What, really? So I called her up. I said, you sent me a CD of James Earl Jones. And she was like, uh-huh. I was like, that's what you expect me to do? And those moments, and we've all had them, right? When the expectations are there, and you have them here, and everybody else has them up here. Well, our political climate right now is very much in that space, where people have expectations that are somewhat outsized in some cases, certainly not as developed in others. And so it reminds me of a lot of things about where our politics is and what's happening in our politics today. And I've concluded that our politics is a lot like a rash, right? It's unsightly, it's irritating, it's lacking any intellectual or ideological coherence. It's one of those things that's there, and you oftentimes ask yourself, why is it still here? Why won't it go away, right? It becomes very frustrating. And like a rash, it could prove inconsequential, right? But also like a rash, it could also be very detrimental. It can cost you a great deal. It may be a symptom of a malady or some other more serious problem that could have consequences beyond your capacity to deal with them. So the other thing that I think we all need to focus on is how we got here and why we're here and how this plays out for us. Because our founding, and very much since our founding, the story of our country has largely been about our aspirations. We tie our expectations to our aspirations, and our aspirations are tied into our expectations. The 2016 presidential election, however, was very different. That election tested the proposition that we're an aspiring people, that we're an aspirational people. What that election showed, I think many of us, at least it showed me, that we are really pissed off. Historian Alexis de Tocqueville once noted, quote, "There's nothing more dangerous than unmet expectations," end quote. And it was the unmet expectations of countless Americans that fueled the anger that defined that presidential cycle. We were angry at Wall Street. We were angry at Muslims, angry at trade deals, angry about the environment, angry about police shootings, angry about Black Lives Matter, angry at the President Obama at the time, angry at Republican obstructionism, angry at undocumented immigrants, and just plain angry at everybody else who was angry. But it should have been clear to us that we were allowing our anger to blind us to an immutable truth. America doesn't have to be great because she is blessed. She is blessed by the fruits of her lands, her spacious skies, and her amber waves of grain. She is blessed by the exceptional nature of her people and the faith they place in freedom. When men and women from around the world still think of a place where they want to be free, they think of us. They think of our home. They think of America. But what makes America uniquely blessed are its ideals, articulated in the Declaration of Independence and manifest in the form of government established by the Constitution, which together bind us to those ideals in order to form a more perfect union. Our country has, of course, witnessed appalling injustice and at times fallen far short of the ideals posited at our founding. Yet at crucial times in America's history, its institutions, political leaders, and its citizens have pushed us to meet those ideals. Through the choices we've made in scores of national elections, we have abolished slavery, expanded suffrage, and provided the conditions that fostered a standard of living that is envied around the world. More important, our greatest leaders understood that our purpose is to work toward achieving those ideals upon which our nation was founded. More than most, Abraham Lincoln understood that those ideals, if implemented, would be transformational. A, quote, nation conceived in liberty, end quote, could and did unleash its citizenry and empower them to achieve moral and material progress so dramatic and so exemplary that it enriched not only the lives of our citizens, but the world. At Gettysburg, Lincoln called for, quote, a new birth of freedom based on our founding proposition that all men are created equal. A century later, Dr. Martin Luther King would summon a nation to write a new chapter in which, as Dr. King noted, quote, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And through it all, the three most important words in our founding documents, the three most important words that defined who we are as a nation, we the people, have remained resilient and optimistic. And when we have stumbled or stood in doubt, we had leaders who lifted our spirit, strengthened our resolve, and moved our nation forward. In fact, President Barack Obama captured the essence of that spirit when he said, quote, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek, end quote. And I remember many at that time mocking those words. But in light of where we are today, and in light of what we've learned about ourselves, how true those words really are. Those words in many ways presaged, however, what would come next, 2016. That contest was not so much about what we aspire to be as it was about who we have become. And what that election revealed was, in some respects, unsettling. We have learned that notwithstanding our ideals and the heroism and sacrifice of prior generations, represented by the likes of King, Malcolm, and Chisholm, we remain vulnerable to the appeals to the baser elements of our nature. Ronald Reagan rallied Americans frustrated by the malaise of the Carter years through a message of optimism. Donald Trump identified with and gave voice to the resentments that smoldered during the Bush and the Obama years, resentments that are still very much alive today. Trump was unafraid of the corrosive identity politics and vilification of other, that is a demagogic staple, and embraced their policy concomitants, immigrant bashing, nationalism, ethnic disparagement, protectionism, and isolationism. How much do we appreciate the dangers of the unmet expectations that at this hour, our nation is moving further away from the very ideals and the very hope that it aspires and inspires to. The problems we face are very real, and voters, particularly those maligned as deplorables or as clinging to guns and religion, or coming from shithole nations, or from cities no human being would live in, are right to feel marginalized and ignored. Many of our communities, particularly those from Washington, far from Washington, New York, or Silicon Valley, are afflicted by a growing despair. In turn, that despair breeds pathologies that further afflict our neighbors and even our families. How many of you have a family member you don't want to talk to because you're afraid of where the conversation may go? Don't mention Trump, oh my God. Don't mention Bernie, I can't deal with that today. Nah, I got a headache. We can overcome our current crisis of spirit and faith. There's no doubt about that. But to do so, we the people must want to. As I tell people when I talk to them, we are where we are because this is where we want to be. It doesn't matter that you did vote for or didn't vote for someone. We don't get to separate ourselves out and act as if something happened that, oh, that was over there, I had nothing to do with that. Because as a community, as a nation, as people, you're still caught up in it. You still have to live through it. You still have to deal with it. You still have to have an opinion about it. You still feel something related to it. So you can't just check out and think that that's someone else's problem or someone else is going to fix that. When you think about the people in the 2016 election who stayed home and are now bitching every day about the 2016 election, you don't get to do that. We, the people, won't allow that to happen. We must want to heed Dr. King's example and persevere in our founding ideal, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. We are all connected, folks. Yeah, our backgrounds are different. Our experiences are different. Our ethnicities are different. Our religions and our faith traditions are different. But the last time I checked, we're here in this building together. You work with each other. Some of you may even be neighbors. Some of you may even sit across from each other in a pew on Sundays or Saturdays. The reality is, this is us. And what we're seeing reflected around the country today is us. You don't get to check it out and go, oh, yeah, that's not who I am. Well, okay, prove it. That's hard to do, though. Whereas Dr. King reminded us that those very ideals called us to serve each other with, quote, unarmed truth and unconditional love, we find ourselves today mired in one of the most unwelcome trends in American society and its politics, the celebration of self. President Obama, in his speech in support of Hillary Clinton at the Democratic Convention, referred to himself 119 times. Donald Trump talks about nobody else other than himself. By contrast, in President Lincoln's two most famous speeches, the Gettysburg Address and his second inaugural address to the nation, he referred to himself only in a single sentence. And there he noted that he had no more insights than any other citizen. He didn't claim to know more than his generals or to know more about the courts than any other human being on earth, or to know the details of taxes better than the greatest CPA. The narcissism of Washington and this president not only impedes the formulation of sound policy, it has corroded our politics and turned our agendas into personal entanglements. I don't support the policy because I don't like you. What? How does that work? When did it become so personal? Why is it so personal? Can you imagine working with a colleague on a very important project and crashing the project because, I don't like them? You're not long for that job, are you? Well, how do you think that works on an expanded scale? You see it function the way it functions in our Congress today. I have members of Congress that I know on both sides, and I sit there and I talk to them, and they have great ideas. I say, well, why don't you you're gonna put that in the bill? Yeah, but I can't take it across the aisle because the minute I do, I get in trouble. You get in trouble. We've so personalized our politics today that our public officials are either frozen or apoplectic, or worse, both. An electoral or governing coalition that coalesces around a personality or a tweet rather than an agenda or ideas, rather than addressing the nation's needs, is not just unsustainable, folks. It's debilitating, and it's not leadership. And yet we continue to vote for it. And yet we continue to support it. And yet we continue to blame and cry and moan about it. We are where we are because this is where you want us to be. I have no ending to this talk because you're going to end it. You're going to write the ending of it in what you say and what you do, because it's left up to you. Dr. King knew that his dream, this movement towards civil rights and human dignity, would be made more difficult to achieve in the face of those who tried to arm the Constitution and our civil rights against us. But his faith in us led him to believe that you could write a new chapter in America's 400-year-old story, a chapter steeped in the hopes of, quote, little black boys and black girls joining hands with little white boys and little white girls. Folks, when he gave that speech on the Mall in 1963, who was he talking to? Who was he talking to? When he talked about his dream, who was he sharing it with? We forgot. That speech was more about today than it was yesterday. It was more about us here and now than it was about the throngs of people standing in front of him on August 28th in 1963. And we've lost sight of that. Until our life and our liberties are valued equally, that dream that he talked about is a fruitless pursuit of happiness. So how this all ends, it's up to us. We have to decide what kind of America we want. We have to decide what kind of leaders we want to lead that America. But most importantly, we have to ask ourselves, who am I in all of this? What are my expectations? And what is expected of me as a citizen, as an American? I'll wait and see what you say. Thank you very much. So we want to do some Q&A, and we can talk about anything and everything. You put some vodka in this, right?
Yes. It's all
We can
vodka.
talk about anything and everything.
It's pure vodka.
Pure vodka.
So we have questions. I actually had a starting question.
Sure.
And I just wanted to know where that rash was.
In most cases, the most unreachable place.
Questions?
We have mics, I think, up here, so folks can hear.
So how do you see the election playing out if you were a prognosticator?
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I do. So today is the Democratic debate in South Carolina, and we've all been waiting to get there. Going into South Carolina, you've got Bernie Sanders, who just cleaned everybody's clock in Nevada, effectively cleaned everybody's clock in New Hampshire. And even though Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, technically won Iowa, Bernie, again, just established the order of things in that regard. So for Joe Biden, this is his firewall, he says. He has to win, in my estimation, this weekend. If he doesn't, I don't see the viability of his campaign beyond Saturday. That's unfortunate because I had projected, this tells you about prognostication. I had a year ago, in looking at the race and the landscape at that time, which is probably mistake number one, but understanding where the body politic inside the Democratic Party was, I thought the ticket, in order to give Trump the most massive headache possible this November, would have been Biden-Klobuchar ticket. And so I kind of went out that, and everyone at the time was like, Amy Klobuchar? I was like, yeah, Amy's going to be fine. She's going to do all right. And lo and behold, she has positioned herself to be well in the contention. Biden, however, has basically sleepwalked through his campaign. He's never been noted as a good campaigner, and I took all of that into consideration. What I thought, though, would be more motivating and animating for him would be, one, the Obama connection, two, the attacks by the president and others over Hunter Biden and Burisma with the Ukrainian situation, and three, his third bite at this apple to run for president, knowing that at his age, it would be his last bite at this apple. But that has not shown itself. So tonight I'm looking at Joe Biden telling me whether or not, and telling all of us whether or not he wants to be president. And if he can't do that, then stick a fork in it. And Bernie Sanders right now is a problem for the Democrats. On a number of fronts. So let me just give you a quick thumbnail so you can understand and contextualize why Bernie Sanders is a problem. Because Bernie Sanders is a problem for the Democrats as Donald Trump was a problem for Republicans. Because Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are actually two sides of the same coin. And a lot of people don't necessarily see that. But understand this. Go back to 2016 and look at what was happening near the end of that campaign. Both their messages were lining up to be pretty much the same. I said at that time, I actually wrote a piece, I think it was in October of 15, that the tickets going into the November election would be Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders on the ballot, not Hillary Clinton. The reason was from what I was hearing on the ground among Democrats and the kind of fire, particularly among young voters, that Bernie Sanders had, which is sort of ironic. You know, the Democrats say, oh, we want young, we want 30-something, oh my God, yeah, and they go for the 78-year-old. And then everybody gets upset. They go, oh, there are no black people on the stage. That's because the voters didn't want them there. Sorry. Go back and look. On the day she resigned from her campaign, Kamala Harris was running fourth in California. Not first, fourth. She knew the writing on the wall. She has a record. People there knew her. And they weren't buying what she was selling. Okay, that's the process. And we all get caught up in the process, and the Democrats tend to get more caught up in the process and weight things differently than the American people, and certainly even in their own base at times. And so when you look at the reality, Bernie Sanders is where he is because that's where the Democrats are voting him to be. People who aren't on the stage aren't there because that's where the primary voters put them. If you're polling at 3% and you get 2% of the vote on primary day, whose fault is that? Right? So we have to take the process for what it is. Voters will always tell you what they want. They will. They will. In most cases, they will. And so when you look at Bernie and Donald Trump, the reality of it is they're two sides of the same coin. They both want to deconstruct the administrative state. They want to take down the existing order of things, all right? I mean, Bernie just was in a speech last week, was talking about, blowing up the system. Well, Donald Trump wants to blow up the system, and he's doing that. So I think we've got to understand where they're coming from. They don't trust Wall Street. They don't trust trade deals, right? They don't like the current structure of things. They think the system is rigged against the worker, against the little guy. The language is the same. Now, The policies may be different, but the underlying principle and ideas are the same. In my book, when I see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the left, I see Jim Jordan on the right. What did Jim Jordan do when he got into Congress? Part of a team that formed what? The Freedom Caucus. And what did they do, not to one, but two Republican speakers of the House? They took them down, right? What did Ocasio-Cortez do? She challenged the speaker before she became speaker, went and protested outside of her office, and then went and said, here is my Green New Deal, you're going to do this. And Nancy, being a Baltimore girl, took the Green New Deal and looked at it and said, oh, this is nice. This is nice. We'll have a committee take a look at this. A commission will take a look at this. And Alexandria was like, great. And she wasn't put on the commission. Right? And for all the bravado, oh, I'm not voting for Nancy. Who'd she vote for? Nancy. All right? But setting that aside, she still has just recently, this past week, now come out with a target of Democrats that she wants to take out. That's what Jim Jordan did. That's what the hard conservatives did on the right, working through the Freedom Caucus, obstructing the Speaker of the House, and setting up challenges to Republicans in their districts in succeeding elections. Ocasio-Cortez and those who are part of her team are doing the same thing now. So we got to see the parallels here. I told Tom Perez, I said, Tom, brother, I've been in this room, trust me. I know what this is like. I had a meeting with a little group of people called Tea Party. They were pissed as hell, right? And you've got to figure out how to manage and work through that because you can't afford to lose the seats that you just got in 2018. So the assessment right now is it's a hot mess on the left. It's a hot mess on the right, too. So don't, let's not get this twisted. I mean, there's not a lot of love for Trumpism on the right as well. But they're stuck. And they're getting stuck on the left. Because right now, Bernie, who is a democratic socialist, all I hear is socialist. I don't know what the rest of it is, right? He is not a Democrat. Trump's not a Republican. He ran as a Democrat in the primary, but after he wins elections, he takes off the Democratic label and he becomes a Democratic socialist again. And he's your front runner. You're going to have to deal with that. And now his recent conversation about, Castro imprisoned people and took their property and land, but, he taught them how to read. That's a good thing. Okay. Sure. Let me know how that works out.
Other questions,
Yes.
please. Use the mic, please.
Oh, there you go.
How do you, is this on?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how do you think term limits might help?
Term limits are an interesting thing. When I was county chairman in Prince George's County, we put together a ballot initiative and actually got term limits passed in Prince George's County to term limit the council members and the county executive to 2 terms, 2 successive terms. And I was all, yeah, term limits, yeah, that'll create parity. It does to the extent that there is turnover, so you don't have the same person serving in the job for 40 years. But there's a lot more that has to go into it than just thinking that turning out this gentleman from office is now going to free up the clog jam in the system. There's something else that's going to be right behind him to clog it just as much. But I think in a broader sense, you couple an earnestness by the people to be watchdog, right? In this process, you can actually change the game a little bit. So for example, if you limit the president to 1 6-year term And everyone's, oh, he's a lame duck. Well, okay, yeah, but we have a lame duck in Virginia, right? As soon as the governor of Virginia is elected, they're a lame duck because they only allow one term. And yet they're very effective. Oh, one term with a 2-year budget cycle. I mean, how crazy is that? But they make it work. And good governors, good leaders make it work. And so I think it would focus the attention of the executive more on their legacy and their ability to get things accomplished and creating the kinds of relationships that they need. Senate limiting them to 3 6-year terms, fine with me. In the House, changing it from every 2-year to 4 years and giving them 16 years total. So you get 4 4-year terms, something like that. You can work with the system, but I think the bottom line lesson is that we still have to be responsible as citizens because we're the ultimate check on our government because we are the government. Those people we elected in those buildings are not the government, folks. I hope you know that, right? You are the government of the United States. And so that's how our founders wanted it to be. Now, sure, they thought it was going to be basically landed white gentry that would do that, but it also speaks to the nature of the documents that they wrote, which I've always believed to be divinely inspired, because if they really were hardened slave owners and hardened segregationists or didn't want women or minorities, they would have very plainly and very clearly, because they could, state that. But they wrote these documents in such broad language, in such a broad way, and they fought over it. There were those who wanted more restrictive language. There were those who didn't, they wanted an imperial presidency. They wanted a president who had absolute power, like the King of England. And they fought against that. They resisted that temptation. And so I kind of look at the totality of this and say, that they had left us the ultimate weapon to fight against tyranny, to fight against stupidity, laziness, all the things that can creep into government and into leadership, and to give us the tools to actually be the government by, for, and of the people. And term limits could be one of those tools, but it doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to stay on top of the men and women you elect.
Other
Anybody
questions?
Else? Yes, sir.
I was really pleased last Friday when I picked up the Wall Street Journal and I saw a letter to the editor from you that had been published eviscerating their warning to Virginia not to adopt the law, directing their electors to vote for whoever won the popular vote. Is that what you support nationwide? And as someone who grew up in D.C., where I've lived for over 40 years, will we ever get voting representation in Congress?
Okay, so let's start with D.C. first. When I was a student at Johns Hopkins, my senior year, I worked on Capitol Hill for Walter Fauntroy, and who was my representative, and worked on the original constitutional amendment that wouldn't give D.C. statehood. It didn't give D.C. statehood. It gave D.C. full representation, 2 senators and a member in the House of Representatives. And so since that time, as a native Washingtonian, my parents still live in Washington, D.C., I've always been an advocate for full representation for the people of Washington, D.C. And as I tell Republicans at the time, and even currently, what the hell are you afraid of? All right, so 2 more Democratic senators in the Senate and 1 more Democratic member of the House. Okay, but if you make your case to the people, if you make your case and it's a good case, what are you afraid of? I can't be afraid of the numbers because I know the numbers are going to change, right? They just did. I changed them in 2010 when I picked up 65 House seats. Newt Gingrich changed it in 1994 when he won the House after 40 years of Democrat control of the House of Representatives. The numbers will change at some point. So it doesn't matter whether D.C. has 1 representative in the House of Representatives or not. The numbers are going to change. It doesn't matter if D.C. has 2 Democratic senators or not, because in 2022, when Republicans have 26 or so Senate seats up, they have more seats up than Democrats, and if Donald Trump is the president of the United States, you're damn sure it's probably going to change, just as it changed in 2018, and they took the House back with 40 seats. So representation is representation. It's not a numbers game. At the end of the day, you either want people to be fully represented by the government or they're not. You want them to have the vote or you don't. I make note because a lot of Democrats had this thing going, oh, Republicans don't want, It's like, wait a minute. When you had Bill Clinton and the Speaker of the House was a Democrat and the Senate President was a Democrat, you did nothing to give D.C. the right to vote. So it's a political thing. It's a partisan thing. And it's about whether or not you want the citizens of the city, majority of whom are African American, you want them to be fully enfranchised. Well, you don't. And if you don't, just tell us you don't, so then we know what we need to do, right? But so you have this mouse and cat and mouse game that's going on and on about D.C. voting rights. So I think that, yeah, they should have it, and I hope they will, but it's a political pawn back and forth. With respect to the broader vote, I work on a thing called the National Popular Vote. And the National Popular Vote is designed to allow the states to enter into a compact, very much like the lottery. So Maryland is part of the lottery compact, which we agree that if folks in Ohio, you live in Ohio, you win the lottery, us Marylanders who paid our good money into the lottery knowing that we would win the lottery, but no, this guy from Ohio won it, okay, we'll pay. We agree to pay you. All right? So similarly, this compact would say that those states in the compact representing 270 electoral votes, all right? So however many states it will take to get to 270, that's the compact, agree that the winner of the national popular vote, we're more and more familiar with what that is now, right? The winner of the national popular vote will get the electoral votes of the members in the compact. All right? So what does that do? What does it mean? Well, what it means is if all of a sudden now, as a candidate running for president, I'm trying to win a national popular vote, not electoral college votes, I'm campaigning very differently. Because under the current system, I'm only going to campaign in about 12 states, not 50. If I'm a Democrat, I'm not campaigning in California. I'm just not. Because I'm, A, going to get those votes, so it doesn't really matter. I will take money out of California, all right? But I'm going to campaign in the battleground states. I'm going to campaign in Florida, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada. It's about 12 states. The rest of you, flyover states or donor states. But all of a sudden now, if I have to campaign in all 50 states, changes the game. And let me tell you how it changes the game, using California again. So what happens on Election Day if you're a Californian? You're in your car and you're heading home. It's 5 o'clock, but it's 8 o'clock on the East Coast. And they've just called the race because the battleground states have put up their numbers. And we see now we're prepared to project so-and-so is just won. You're in your car. You were going to vote. Now you're not. And what we have discovered, just on the Republican side, 4 million votes don't get cast because people go home. Why? You just called the race. Why am I going to go vote? Now, but now if you're in a system where every vote counts and that 4 million votes will add to my national total, what am I going to do as a campaign? I'm going to push you to keep going. They're not going to call the race on the East Coast because they can't, because the vote is just still counting for another 3 hours on the West Coast. And so I've got a ground game to turn out my vote in California. Now, I may not win California as the Republican candidate, but I may pick up another 4 to 6 million votes that'll add to my national total. And so if I win by 2 million votes, guess what? Ta-da, thank you, California. If I lose by 2 million votes, it's because my vote went home under the old system. So the idea is to get everybody to vote, to participate in the system, to force the candidates to change the way they campaign. Even Donald Trump acknowledged under the national popular vote, he said if the national popular vote were in place in 2016, he would have campaigned differently. He said if it's in place now, he would campaign differently. He'd have to, because now you have to get votes out of every state. Maryland becomes just as important as Florida. Why? Because it's not just about amassing the electoral college vote, because those states are now in a compact. It's about mining as many votes as you can out of the state of Maryland for your candidate. And as a Republican, you would say, well, they're not going to vote for me anyway. Well, it doesn't matter. You still got to go mine. You want to get those votes. You want to get as many as you can. Now, some people get upset and say, well, what if the Democrat is the one who gets the national popular vote? That means that my Maryland, I've got to, if I'm a red state like Ohio or someplace like that, then all of a sudden you're going to give your electoral votes to a Democrat. Well, no, you're giving your electoral votes to the person who won the national popular vote. You don't know who that was going to be, so you're not giving your votes to any particular candidate or party. And that's, it's the same argument. I'm giving the money to this guy in Ohio. Well, no, I didn't know the guy in Ohio was going to win the lottery that day. I just agreed to give the money to whoever won the lottery. And so this compact is a way in which we're hoping to, and you don't have to blow up the electoral college, because that's not going to happen, folks. You will never have the votes to do that. We're not going to have a constitutional amendment. It will never make it through the states, the 38 states required to amend the Constitution to eliminate the Electoral College, at least not in our lifetime. It's just not, so don't believe that smoke and mirror craziness. It's just not going to happen because largely there's no will among the people to do it. The people aren't inclined to do that. Activists are, but rank and file voters aren't. They want the system to change. They want it to get fixed. They don't like this idea. They still find it unsettling that you win more votes than he does, but he winds up becoming president. And so we'll see how it plays out. We'll see how it plays out.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I'll do.
Okay.
We'll do
two.
you. Yeah, go ahead.
There's this line that's going around now, Democrats fall in love with. There's so many general issues that parties could be working on to get things done. I guess Congress be so paralyzed to work with people on the other side. Or what do you think can happen to change, or even if it's one or two individuals? So I think if at least one party comes together to do something, that can start a cascade. But right now, both sides seem to be so.
That's a very good question. I will give you an example of where in the last year they actually got something done, and that was on the criminal justice reform effort, where you had Jared Kushner leading the administration's effort and individuals like Cory Booker in the Senate and Rand Paul, Democrat, Republican, in the Senate, sort of picking up the mantle on the congressional side. And they forged together a bill that both sides could walk away with a smile on their face, at least a half smile, but it's a good bill, and that would be signed by the president. So can that happen again? Yes, it can happen, for example, on infrastructure. The one thing that I noted at the time was when Donald Trump came into office, Donald Trump did not want to lead with health care because he doesn't care about health care. He's not interested in health care. It's just not, he's a developer. He likes to build stuff, right? Likes to stick his name on things, right? He can't stick his name on health care, at least not the way Obama did, right? And so, or the way some of us stuck Obama's name on it. And so he doesn't want to go into that space. What he wanted to do was to come out on infrastructure because he knew that that was something he could do. He was talked out of doing it. And here's the irony. When Barack Obama came into office, Obama wanted to lead on health care. He wanted to go out the door on health care. Rahm Emanuel, his then chief of staff, said, no, it'll kill us. You don't want to do that. All right, let's lead on something else. I think it was something on the environment, cap and trade or something like that. And Obama said no, and he pushed ahead on health care. Trump comes in, Trump's like, I don't want to lead on health care. And his chief of staff goes, yeah, we do. We want to lead on health care. Why? Because Republicans had been lying to the American people for 7 years that they had a plan to repeal and replace Obamacare, right? And a lot of us were raised and said, no, you don't. You don't have it. No, you don't have it. Sorry. They don't have it. Sorry, they don't have it. And they didn't. And it set the president back. And he was very ticked off about that. His instincts were, I want to lead on something that I can get immediate buy-in from Democrats. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, then in the minority for Nancy, and Chuck in the Senate were amenable to that. And we saw some of the early conversations sort of bubbling around this whole infrastructure opportunity and how that would play itself out. So the elements are there to do something, but it goes back to what I said before, whether or not there's a will to get it done. If our leaders aren't prepared to sacrifice their job to work on behalf of the American people, they should be removed from those jobs. That was how I did my job as lieutenant governor. I remember talking with Governor Ehrlich one day, and we were sort of looking ahead to things that we wanted to get done in the administration. And a lot of this has to come probably from my seminary training and how I kind of look at things. And I said to him, well, God only gave me this moment. I can't think or believe that I'm going to have the next moment in 4 years, that I'm going to get reelected to the office, right? And circumstances would have it, I wasn't even on the ticket 4 years later, because the Senate seat had opened up, and I was asked to do that. And okay, well, we can, Ehrlich in the State House, me in the Senate, we can get some good things done. So you don't know where life's going to take you. So while you're in the moment in the job, do the damn job. But our elected officials today are so afraid to do that because they want to get reelected. It's all about their reelection. And so I'm of a mind now just unelect them all and start over. Seriously, I mean, you have to make them account. You have to make them account for what they're not doing. And when you have the opportunity to move the nation forward on something like infrastructure, which is so profoundly important and so necessary, folks, I don't know if you've traveled anywhere outside of the United States, but it's a whole other world out there when it comes to what countries are doing in infrastructure. And we're just sort of pity-patting our way through. And we got a nice little airport over here, and we've got a nice little road that's about 4 miles long over here. We got all the potholes out, we're good. But we need something a little bit more systemic and better rooted than that. And it's going to take leaders to do it. My bet is if Donald Trump is reelected, and especially if he loses the Senate in 2 years, then it's going to be crazy. And, you'll see him do a lot of what Barack Obama did, and that's executive order this, executive order that near the end of his term, because he couldn't get anything to move inside the House or the Senate. And that is not good for the business of the country. One more over here, and then I think we'll wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. So I used to be really excited about politics, and I'm still sort of, addicted.
Right.
But now I feel like I'm triggered and actually doing self-harm every time I actually turn. Honestly, I mean, it's tough. It's tough. I actually talk about it in counseling. But my question is for you because
I love your honesty. I love your honesty. Yeah.
you've been
I've
doing
been
this
there.
for a very long time. And so the question is, you mentioned sort of the overt or subtle discussion around otherism and racism. And what's your recommendation to keep people of color really engaged in politics when it just seems so blatantly sort of policies and the discourse, it's getting just really tough to remain engaged. So what's your recommendation?
It's okay. So last year we celebrated 400 years of the African American experience in this country. How old is our nation? 200 and what? 40, right. But we celebrated 400 years on this continent. So this idea of giving up, like what? I built this. I'm a part of this as much as anybody else. We have a stake in this place called America as much as anybody else. And yeah, our journey has been more torturous and more difficult, but no less important, no less significant, and no less valuable to creating the American dream. So what I would say to African Americans, and what I say all the time, is particularly to young African Americans, understand that this is your birthright and take hold of it. When I was inaugurated on the steps of our Capitol, it was a proud moment, yeah, but it was more humbling than that, more humbling than proud. You know why? Because literally, several hundred yards behind me in Annapolis Harbor, literally down the hill from those Capitol steps, Kunta Kinte was brought to this country as a slave and was sold on the dock of Annapolis. And here I was standing on the steps of the Capitol, being sworn into high office as the lieutenant governor. That's 400 years of legacy. And we can't lose sight of that. And we should not misinterpret it, nor should we allow anyone else to define it for us. There's been too much that we have sacrificed, standing shoulder to shoulder with white folks, other ethnic groups, with gay men and women, with women. We've all been elbow to elbow in this struggle. And so I just think that it's important for us to really appreciate what these 400 years have meant. What the hell were you celebrating it for? What were you acknowledging it for? To give up? To say, oh, well, that was done. We're done with that now. Well, it's 400 years. I'm tired. You know? Sojourner Truth didn't get tired. Malcolm X didn't get tired. I mean, these are individuals in our history that we look to and we get inspiration from. So, I'm frustrated by a lot of what I see. When the president said what he said about Baltimore, I thought it was important to come here and say, no, you can't claim this way. It was important to do that. Why? Because I know the city. I spent time in the city. I've worked with people in the city. And you can't say that this is a place where nobody wants to live when clearly that's not true. And so we have to find our voice in those moments, the voice militant, to say that, no, this is how this really is. This is our stake as well. But then we have to do something about it, all right? At what point do we get tired of the condition of our schools that we send our kids to? At what point do we get tired of the condition of the neighborhoods that we live in? And we push back again against that leadership that leads us but has done nothing to help us change these conditions. So it's a dual responsibility that's anchored in a long history, but I think has resonant value for you and the generation that's coming behind you. So you've got something to pass on. You've got something to stake a claim in. It's called America. It's called Baltimore. And if folks don't like that, that's their problem, not yours. And they need to know that. Thank you all very much. Great pleasure being here. Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our Lieutenant Governor, a treasure in this state.
Thank you, sir.
Keep coming here, please.
Oh, absolutely.